In the past, we have established very scientifically, very objective facts that have been proven by science, such as Mexican food is the best on the planet. Objectively, that is true. Churros are the best dessert you could ever have. That is objectively true. Uh, the Mexican Grand Prix is amazing. That is objectively true. So anyway, I'm very much looking forward to another great conversation with you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Very scientific. So I mentioned Dr. Nick Norwitz in the introduction. Obviously, he went to school with you. You guys are very good friends. We've got to have a few conversations with him over the years, and he has made a bit of a splash recently in this whole kind of world of the lipid energy model that you, of course, know very well, and you've contributed amazing research to. And he has come up with a very kind of provocative kind of an experiment to show, how to control high cholesterol levels, if I can say it that way. And the way he did it is he designed a trial that I thought was pretty well designed, where he showed that he could lower his cholesterol more eating Oreo cookies than he could by taking a statin. And he did that just to kind of prove a point and hopefully move a conversation forward. And hopefully eventually we'll get him on to be able to talk about that experience. But this is obviously something that's very near and dear to your heart. So you would be, I think, really interesting to talk to about the situation. Can you tell us a little bit more about what he did?
Sure. In this last experiment, what he did was that he kept his usual diet, which is a ketogenic diet, recorded his cholesterol, which, is very high as he is very lean, and then evaluated what would happen to the concentration of LDL if you introduce 100 grams a day of even the lousiest possible version of carbohydrates, which is Oreo cookies. Perhaps you can come up with even worse versions than that. But anyway, the point is that he was looking for something notorious, so to speak, or something that would raise eyebrows. No one would think Oreo cookies could be a treatment for dyslipidemia. And of course they aren't. This was just to prove a point that carbs by themselves are a very strong regulator of the LDL response. And then recorded his LDL during this Oreo phase. Then there was a washout period. And then he went back to the ketogenic diet. Cholesterol went up again, actually a tiny bit higher than during the first phase, over 500, and then used the high dose of the most potent statin, which is rosuvastatin. It's perhaps one of the most famous, if not the most famous, medication for lowering cholesterol. And the cholesterol came down again as expected, but certainly not as much as with Oreo cookies. And this was to prove a point. Of course, the point of this intervention is not to say that if you have dyslipidemia, you should eat Oreo cookies. That couldn't be further from the truth. The point is that you can pick pretty much any source of carbs, and the LDL response in someone lean, restricting carbohydrates, will be dramatic, which is, of course, consistent with other studies that we've published so far. One of the case reports compared, for example, MUFA and PUFA, different compositions in the diet. Nick also, a while ago, I think, went for a while on a vegan ketogenic diet, or a vegetarian ketogenic diet. Yeah, it was vegan ketogenic diet, because vegetables don't have cholesterol. The membranes are similar but different molecule, ergosterol. So being cholesterol less, you cannot attribute cholesterol changes to your intake. So even a ketogenic diet without cholesterol also raises cholesterol. And this is also in line with what we reported in the first LMHR paper, in the current developments in nutrition paper, where there is a case series from Tro Kaldian's clinic in which 6 patients have very large elevations of LDL during carbohydrate restriction, but also very large reductions in LDL when they incorporate even a little bit of carbohydrates. So this is, you could say that this is an argument that tries to make a point using an extreme scenario. And it looks to highlight the mechanism we think explains both things. We think that what explains why lean people have so massive LDL increments when they restrict carbohydrates is the same thing that explains why LDL goes down so quickly when they introduce a small amount of carbohydrates, regardless of the quality of these carbohydrates. And this explanation is the lipid energy model, which in a nutshell proposes that if you have low peripheral reserves of fat, in other words, if you're lean and your energy demand is high, there is extra pressure on your liver to redistribute the fat that arrives and the fat that's around. And this is translated into a high VLDL excretion from the liver, and it's very rapid conversion by lipoprotein lipase into LDL. And LDL accumulates because LDL has a longer life than other lipoparticles. And that's what explains why it goes up. When you remove this pressure on the liver to export very low density lipoproteins by consuming a tiny amount of carbs, now you have glycogen to export. You don't need to export as much VLDL. So that also explains that within a few days, your LDL comes down. And some of the predictions of the lipid energy model have already been independently observed, as in other data sets different from the one we used for the CBN paper. Some remain to be tested, and we're working and testing them right now. But that's, in a nutshell, the point that the Oreo cookie experiment is trying to emphasize.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that and for explaining the lipid energy model. The thing I find fascinating is if you would have explained all of this, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I would have thought this whole thing was ridiculous. I couldn't have told you hardly anything that would have happened, but I wouldn't have said that would have been relevant at all to cholesterol, adding more carbohydrates, and especially the worst, as you say, like probably we can all agree that's not the best carbohydrate source that you could be eating is a bunch of Oreos. The thing that is fascinating to me is I don't think anybody who is familiar with this model was surprised by the results. I was not surprised at all what the results were going to be. If the model were correct, if I understand each step in the model, then this outcome would be, it would punch you in the face. Like there's no other outcome that you would expect unless there's some type of a paradox, as people say, which really just means you need to go back and take a look at your hypothesis and keep reworking it until you can explain it. But that's the striking thing to me. I don't think anybody in this world who's heard of this and understands it well was surprised by the results. Were you surprised by the results?
Oh, certainly not. Actually, we ran a small bet on who would win. And yeah, I mean, not surprised. I wasn't surprised with the results. I think this fulfilled the expectations of most people familiarized with the lipid energy model. And perhaps something that I would add is that you can always say that this is just an N equal 1 experiment, you know? Like, okay, what if Nick comes from another planet and he has a set of mutations that are unique to his condition and therefore not, we can't make extrapolations from this. However, this fits very well with what we found in other data sets. So it's decreasingly possible that you can explain Nick's Oreo result with Nick's intrinsic individualities or peculiarities as a human being. So, I mean, what is more likely that this is a physiological mechanism with surely varying degrees of influence in different people. I mean, of course, some interpersonal variability is expected, but is this normal physiology, or that Nick happens to inherit alien lipid metabolism genes that make his condition unique? I mean, that's very unlikely. And the fact that other groups, not necessarily who have collaborated with us, have reported similar observations, and also the fact that when we systematically reviewed randomized control trials of people who weren't self-allocating themselves to carbohydrate restriction and who weren't measuring their LDL or reporting their lipid panel, we observed the same thing happening. I mean, if you are lean, your LDL goes up. If you are not lean and you have actually an excess of fat storage, peripheral fat storage, your LDL actually comes down. And if you are in the middle, your LDL stays pretty much the same or doesn't suffer from relevant changes. So I think that changing hypothesis requires different forms of arguments. There is value in having extreme arguments or extreme points like the Oreo result. There's also value in having independent corroborations, other people observing similar things. And there's also value of showing the you could say that a mix in between. I mean, the other paper that recently came out that was a collaboration with the University of Westminster, with the Physiological Human Lab at the University of Westminster, and which stemmed out from Isabella's Cooper doctoral thesis. I mean, we were part of that analysis, but the data was produced independently by another group, and also reports results in line. Well, yeah, that certainly decreased how surprised we were from seeing Oreo cookies beating the high dose of a high potency statin.
It's okay. So again, it's fascinating to me. It wasn't surprising to me. I was trying to explain this to one of my clients recently. There's kind of a difference between expected results and unexpected results. So for example, this client who I've been training him for a while, he's rolling now. He's starting to buy into nutrition. He is tightening up his diet. He's making changes. He's cutting a lot of sugar out of his diet, and he's doing really well. And so he explained the first few days, I've got a headache. I feel flat. I don't have very good energy. This kind of sucks. A few days later, it was like, I'm thinking a little bit more clearly. My sleep is less. Like I don't feel tired during the day, but I'm not sleeping as much. And now my joints are feeling much, much better. And I'm listening to all of this and thinking like, I expect all of those results at this point. I've heard this story so many times. I've gone through it myself. Those are things that I expect. If he had said, I tried changing my diet and my arm turned green, that would be an unexpected result. I would not assume that would happen. And if so, there may be multiple explanations for why his arm is green besides just changing the diet. But I think it's so much stronger when, again, if you understand the model, you are expecting those results to happen. And it just, the evidence is getting stronger and stronger, it seems like.
I agree. I mean, as I alluded earlier, not all hypotheses have been confirmed. For example, one we are working on producing data at the moment is what we named the gym hypothesis. Can you induce this phenotype on someone by controlling their energy expenditure, basically by observing them exercise more? The prediction would be that for a lean person restricting carbohydrates, LDL would be even higher if they increment their exercise activity or the amount of energy they spend every day. That would be one prediction. Another hypothesis that we published in the LEM review and hypothesis paper is, for example, the role of NGPTL, the NGPTL family. Another role that hasn't been explored yet is, for example, ApoC3. Another hypothesis that, I mean, there are other things that have, yet to be directly measured or tested, but so far, yeah, I mean, there is converging evidence and observations on that. At least the main statements or the main hypothesis of the lipid energy model holds true. For example, there is some, this is worth mentioning, I mean, there is some alternative hypotheses or possible explanations people came up with or put forward for the Oreo experiment. For example, one of them is that insulin, we know already that insulin is a strong regulator and has a strong influence on the activity of LDL receptor. So one of the hypotheses was that LDL coming down is more a response of insulin, or is more directly attributable to insulin going up when you introduce carbohydrates, and this increases the activity of the receptor of LDL in the liver and increases its clearance. This is, of course, a valid, plausible, and I would say even well-formulated hypothesis. We didn't observe an association with insulin markers or insulin itself in the study with the University of Westminster. At the same time, it would be hard to tease out this special effect because you would need to be able to manipulate either the activity of the LDL receptor or the changes in insulin if you introduce carbohydrates. So that particular physiological mechanism may be harder to explore. However, perhaps the most important or pragmatical point of view holds true. If you introduce a tiny amount of carbohydrates, your LDL would come down.